The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar featuring new research on how to overcome the technology gap in smart building adoption. I'm Ann Cosgrove, the editor-in-chief of Facility Executive Magazine, and this webinar today is presented by HID Global. HID Global powers the trusted identities of the world's people, places, and things, and the company makes it possible for people to transact safely, work productively, and travel freely. The company's trusted identity solutions give people convenient access to physical and digital places and connect things that can be identified, verified, and tracked digitally. Over 2 billion things that need to be identified, verified, and tracked are connected through HID's technology. And the objective for today's webinar is to share the findings and insight of the recent research that the company conducted with regard to building occupancy management, smart building technology, and best practices to overcoming the gap in technology adoption that we are seeing. So we're glad you're joining us today. We look forward to a great presentation and some Q&A at the end. So first, I would like to cover some housekeeping items. As I mentioned, we'll have Q&A at the end, so please note the control panel on your screen. You can submit your questions for the speaker in the question box in that panel. You can send your questions in at any time, and we'll address them after the presentation. Also, please note the orange arrow on the left side of your panel. Clicking on that will either expand or collapse the panel, so please be sure it is expanded. And then if at any time you experience a technical difficulty, you can send a message to us in that question section, and someone will answer you privately right away. Just before I introduce your speaker, I'd like to point out that there are resources from HID Global today relevant to the webinar. They're available for you to download at any time. If you look in your control panel, you'll see a handouts sub-panel, and you can click on those 4 resources there. It's 3 white papers and a brochure related to the content today, so please feel free to download those at any time. Okay, so now also, lastly, if you're interested in continuing education credits, note you'll receive a certificate of attendance in an email from Facility Executive after this webinar, and you can report those to your association for the continuing education credits. Okay, so moving on, I'd like to introduce your speaker, Taylor Bryan. Taylor is Global Business Development Manager of Location Services for HID Global, focusing on vertical markets such as K-12, healthcare, and manufacturing. Taylor has extensive experience in solving end-user needs around personal location and asset tracking technologies. So we look forward to hearing from him today. He has more than 10 years of vertical market experience with a global responsibility for HID's real-time location services. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Taylor. Hi, Taylor.
Hey, good afternoon. How are you doing?
Great, thank you. Looking forward to the presentation.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Ann. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Taylor Bryan. I work with HID Global on our global business development for RTLS systems and smart building technologies. We're excited to have you on board today, and we'll try to keep this presentation to about a 45-minute slide deck, as well with a Q&A afterwards. We have a lot of insight that we'd like to share, and hopefully we can have a strong Q&A at the end regarding some of the information we're sharing today and any questions you may have. Sure. Trying to hit next there, Neil. There we go. Going back one. Some of the topics that we'll discuss for today are what's driving smart technology within your smart building. So we have research that comes from about 265 different clients that HID works with across North America. We'll talk about what are we driving within smart technology, what are we hearing as feedback, and then the benefits of having that smart building. A lot of different vertical markets have requirements for different needs. So we'll talk through some of those benefits having a smart building. I may not touch on all of them, but I'll try to touch on the few pertinent ones that everyone on the call probably has listened to. We'll also talk about the research. So we'll go through the findings and some of the information that we've actually gathered. Some notes that you'll find there is that HID covers about 70 to 80% of the North American access control market. So we get input from a lot of the Fortune 50 and Fortune 100 clients. The challenges of the current landscape. something you may be dealing with in your different roles and positions every day, and how can we overcome those? So closing that technology gap. We know budgets will come up in this conversation, but what's most pertinent to your users and what's most pertinent to the owners of the facilities that you manage and work with. And then we'll go into a Q&A session after that. So what are the drivers of smart technology? As you'll see on the current slide and presentation, occupancy is changing quite a bit globally. 50% of the workforce that's coming in will be of the millennial generation. This is a generation that they've come into the workforce with smartphones. They are used to mobility. They're used to the tech savviness, looking at different apps, different products. They're not used to being in an office. They work from home half the time. So some of the data that we've actually received from this is that the global solutions system workplace for optimization in 2017 was about $1.5 billion. In 2021, it's going to be about $4.4 billion. So a net increase of around $3 billion in solutions that are looking to make your building more optimized, smarter, mobile. And a lot of this data is around cloud-based software and analytics, and how are you going to expand and improve your current building or any new buildings you may be working with. So we'll cover through some of these challenges and where this market is going, but there's a myriad of different solutions out there, and so we'll talk through some of the data that we've seen from that. A little bit of delay there, but so what is the main reason for smart buildings? So we put in a few different qualifiers from the RTLS market where I've worked. What we're seeing is that a lot of the technology is older and it costs more to renovate and expand, but you still have the same basic needs: time and attendance, how your building is being utilized. Hoteling is a key word that you'll find these days. Probably about 50% of HID's clients have come to us trying to figure out what happens next, right? Where are their employees going? How are they using the spaces? A study came out from CNBC that I don't have here, but something like 1,200 stores have closed down in the UK just in the last 24 months. So how are these buildings being utilized? What's that visibility look like? Wayfinding. Everyone's used Waze or Google Maps, but indoor wayfinding now is really taking hold in the education spaces, the healthcare spaces, as well as large campus complexes. So wayfinding is another reason for smart buildings and the technologies that are being added. The experience is also becoming fulfilled there. So is a conference room booked? How many times has someone walked into an office space and try to find a conference room for meetings or to work with other colleagues, and it's booked and you see the rooms are booked, but there's actually no one in the room. So you have lots of challenges that you're trying to overcome. Then we'll get into more of the operational efficiencies. So asset tracking. Where are different items on the floor? How is your temperature settings and machines being monitored? Are they connected in through a backnet? Are they IP based now? How do you work with your current commercial real estate management companies on maintaining these buildings and these assets? Lighting control, energy control. So a lot of what HID is now doing is working with the RTLS products for asset tracking tags and for environmental monitoring tags. It's simplifying what you have to do and what could cost tens of millions of dollars for large buildings at a fraction of the price. So as we go into the building benefits, as I mentioned, these are pretty straightforward. It's nothing new to anyone really on this call, but optimizing your resources. some of the known articles that have been in the news, Barney's in New York, when it filed for bankruptcy, they're paying over $200,000 a year in real estate. So is your space being utilized? Two of Fortune 50 clients that we work with globally, multi-building, multinational companies, managing 2-3 million square feet of property, they're being asked for more conference rooms. But what they're realizing is 50% of their conference rooms actually aren't being utilized. They're being booked and no one's actually using them. So how can you streamline those? Understanding the desk space. A lot of people are commuting. The millennial generation is all about the travel. Can I work remotely? Do I need to be in an office? Or can I work across multiple offices in multiple cities? So for some of your larger clients, how can you be more flexible with that? And then the ability to track assets. And I love showing the golf carts here because there's a large movie studio out in California that they actually wanted to track their golf carts and their assets, forklifts and manufacturing, fusion pumps and beds and healthcare. In your standard commercial real estate, different devices that people need on different floors are being utilized and taken, and no one can track them down. So asset tracking is become a mainstream request. This all kind of feeds into some of the last points, but safety and security. Unfortunately, we live in a very complex time with what's going on. But how are you tracking staff and visitors? How do you know where people are going? So boosting the security and setting up policies around different floor approaches. How are people using the floors? We'll cover a lot of this in the research as we get going, but I wanted to show just some of the policy violations that are now possible for pennies on the dollar type solutions that are in the market. Some of the other slides that we like to show are what happens in an emergency situation. HID is, again, one of the leaders in access control, but when everyone's running out of a building for a fire or for some type of emergency situation, how do you know everyone checked into that building? How do you know everyone actually exited the premises? Mustering in the parking lot has been a very strong initiative, but if you have a 8th floor building and you have people leaving from every single door and entryway, how do you know where they're going? How do you know what's really happening once that emergency happens? So we're looking at how we can boost the safety and security for the staff and for the visitors on a real-time basis. So this all leads to one really big question is, where do your employees, visitors, and vendors go? Once they're through the turnstiles, once they're through that grid of security, do you care where they are? Some of the statistics that I'll cover later is about 47% of the facilities that answered in the research, they are somewhat aware that there are staff in the building or visitors in the building. But how do you know that they're not accessing areas and apartments that they shouldn't be? This is a big question mark, and it's a lot of risk, really, that these companies are putting on. And in the time of the legal proceedings that have been seen in the news, this is pertinent information, knowing where do people go after that turnstile? How are these vendors and managers being watched? And how can we help with that from an HID perspective? Something we get asked all the time. So I'll dive a little bit more into the data and the driven analytics. Some of the things that we've seen is, and this is actually one of the slides we use, but HID, and a lot of people on the call may not be familiar, but HID, again, strong in the access control market, actually acquired a RTLS company, real-time location system company. There's a few different technologies out there using Wi-Fi. For the last about 8 years, I've worked for several in the healthcare space, but RTLS is real-time location system. It's not passive, it is active. What is happening in your environment? What is happening in your space? HID has taken note of this. That's why they have made an acquisition, because where are you? What are you doing? Where is that item? Where is that product? So real-time data that gives you real-time results so that over 30 days, 45 days, 60 days, you now get a better idea and a visual of what's happening in your environment. How are people moving? How are people going to grab coffee? How many people are leaving for lunch? What does that space utilization look like with conference rooms and hoteling? So as we go through this, we'll show some of the data that we've uncovered, but this is some of the different examples that we like to talk about for asset and people locating as you start looking at how are buildings being utilized. So difference in proximity and RTLS. For those on the call, if you may have heard the terminology RFID, typically you've walked into a clothing store and you've heard the alarm go off, that's an RFID tag. It's a passive piece of equipment that's about 50 cents to $1. And all it's saying is, hey, something should not be near the sensor. The problem with that is if it's not near a sensor, it doesn't give you the real information of what's happening. So it's a passive system. RTLS is you are in this area. You are in this conference room. You are in this desk. So as you can see with the current visual, how does this affect your smart building? Well, everyone's looking at workplace optimization for occupancy data. Is someone actually in that room? How many times have you sat in a conference room and had to wave your hand to keep the lights on? That's an occupancy center. It's a passive piece of technology. So a lot of different variations between passive technologies and active technologies that can give you the data that you're looking for. As we'll keep going through, this is some more just some screenshots around data-driven analytics, but we have some very large multinational banks that we are current pilots with where they want to know how many traders are on the floor. Was a trader on that floor when a trade was made? Or in a car setting, you have a lot of R&D, a lot of technology, fashion industry, same thing. Where are people accessing the floors? Where are they going with their colleagues or with their friends? If I'm a vendor and I'm in a large office building, a lot of times you don't know where they're at or what's really happening. No one wants to be tracked. We call it location data because it's all based on GDPR. It's anonymized information. So I don't know who is where, what they're doing, unless I have to dive in, unless there's a situation or something that happened and I need to dive into that data. But at least it gives you your occupancy per floor. It can give you your occupancy over a 24, 48, 72-hour time span. So just different information that we can provide and share. But allows you to make informed decisions. And this is really the importance of where we're at with real estate today. When you're paying, again, a $200,000 lease per year, do you need 200,000 square feet? Do you need 1 million square feet? How are those rooms being utilized? And is the energy that's being used in those rooms worth it? Is that a cost to you? So we'll show some of this as we get into the later research. As I mentioned, one of the technologies that HID provides is going mobile. Everyone has access control badge. I would say everyone probably on this call has walked in and tapped a card to a hotel door. All that embedded technology is OEM'd and a good chunk of it through HID. So we've been asked and we've been put and challenged by our clients of where's that going with millennials. One of the newest press releases that was actually put out is Apple has now launched the Apple Wallet using secure access control. So HID is one of the first in the world to provide both near field access control and Bluetooth access control to opening doors. Why is this so big? Well, the younger generation, they want to be mobile. They don't want to be located, but they want to have access to everything. They want to be able to pay for things. They want to be able to get in through the doors with their phones, the parking garages with their phones. And the beauty of a phone is, how many of you have known someone that's lost a phone and within 30 minutes, you're either wiping the phone using Find My iPhone, or you know what's happened to it. With an access card, it gets lost for days. Where did that card go? How many times have you had to replace a card and someone actually mentioned they'd been gone for about 30 to 40 minutes or 20, 2 days, 3 days. So one of the nice things that Apple has brought to the table with this is that everything is going mobile. What that also allows you to do is you now have that technology in the building. You can see the occupancy of people using these devices on different floors and how your space is being utilized. So with that, and I'll slow down a little bit, but one of the things that we wanted to take the time to ask the audience, and this is a poll question, is how many in the audience today are looking at these technologies and feel that they are either an innovator, someone that is a risk taker. Your company's okay with trying new things, even if they fail, right? They're always open for pilots, or an early adopter, selective about which new technologies to invest in, highly informed. I imagine a few of you on the call today are some of those folks. The early majority, so taking time before adopting, willing to embrace if you have the right ROI and you have the right leadership. The late majority, so most of the uncertainty must be resolved. You're not going to, I use this analogy as I don't update the iPhone's newest software for the first week or two, because I want to make sure that all the bugs are worked out. I want to make sure everything's out. And then the laggard, you prefer the traditional approach. Why fix what's not broken? If there's nobody pushing for it, we're not gonna update it. So this is a poll that will be open. You have about 30 seconds for everyone that's on the call. But happy to hear the results, and we'll compare it to the results we have from the companies later on.
Great. Thank you, Taylor. Hi, this is Ann. I just want to jump in to help facilitate that poll. Please do, in the audience, go ahead and vote what you define your organization as according to Taylor's definitions there. So we will show the results in just a few moments, and then we'll continue. So let's see who we have in the audience today. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so Taylor, yes, as you can see there, and as everyone can see on the screen, nearly half, late majority, followed by innovators in the audience, 21%, and early adopter, early majority, and laggard all round out at 11% each. So that's interesting. Thank you very much, audience, and back to you, Taylor.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks for everyone for chiming in. And what we'll do is I will go to this next slide. Let me see how this works. But the next slide is our new research. So what did we learn? We had 265 companies across North America answer this poll for us. And in comparison, how did your peers respond? So in this current poll with people on the line, your call was 21% were innovators. It's more than double what we had from the 265 different organizations that answered this poll. So 21% versus the 8% that you see here. Early adopter, 18% is what people came back with in our poll. For the online webinar, currently we're at 11%, so a little bit higher. The big difference is early majority. Very interested in that one. Early majority takes time before adopting, willing to embrace the right use case. That was about 50%. On this call, only 11%. So I think that with these explanations of where are people, early majority or late majority, which 46% of the folks on the call today said that you were a late majority. So most of the uncertainty must be resolved and really to embrace a once proven technology. And that's great to talk to, because we'll actually cover this a little bit later in some of the other feedback that we received. And then the laggard. so 9%, and on the call was about 11%. So overall, late majority and laggard on the call is about 60%, compared to online when we did this poll. We're only looking at much lower. Only about a third of the population really consider themselves in the late end of the adoption curve. So interesting results there. So as we get moving forward, some of the other research that we will show is how are you managing, nope, I'm too far, but basically it's new research. Which of the following response protocols does your organization have in place? So we were able to take a time lapse from 2017 to 2019, and I'd be curious how everyone stacks up on the call today. But in 2017, we had 53% of an active shooter response. That's up nearly 10% to 2019. Fire, pretty standard. We have the fire protocol, but that has gotten a lot of increase there. The interesting one was really the no plan. I don't know how it went from 10% to 3%, but I would assume everyone on the call has some form of emergency response protocol, right? So what does that really mean when we look at that data? How can you execute and really provide safety and quality for the folks that are working in your buildings? Being prepared and planning is one of the things of the smart technology. So opening the doors when a fire alarm happens. A lot of times they're telling you not to leave the building anymore. So some interesting information there. One of my favorites of the research, and let's see if this jumps over. There we go. Monitoring methods. So what methods do you use to monitor employees and visitors in their location in the building throughout the day? This is an interesting poll that we actually took. 30 to 34% basically said that they didn't really have a method in place for monitoring employees and visitors throughout the day. You had no way to account for them in an emergency situation. That's kind of eye-opening. 30% of the folks in your buildings, no one knows where they're at or what they're doing or if they even left. We had an example of a large chemical company down in Houston, Texas, that had a large chemical fire breakout, and they were watching people against a massive campus. People were jumping over fences. People were running for their lives, essentially. How do you know who's still in the building, who's not in the building? With fire escapes, with all the different ways that you can enter and exit the building, parking garages, how do you know who's still in a building? So this is some great information that shows that access control and time and attendance are kind of your standard ways, but they're all voluntary, right? So I say again, all voluntary. We have that human factor that we have to deal with. And given GDPR and all of the privacy concerns, we have to be careful with that information. I think Facebook and a lot of the other online platforms are starting to go through this now, but how are we maintaining? What are people doing? How are we watching that occupancy in a building? So we'll share some of these slides after this presentation, so everyone on the call can get this data. We also have a white paper that speaks to this in more generality, so everyone will have access to this at a later date. So the next one, I thought this was actually, as we were working with our marketing team, again, do you know the real-time location of employees and visitors? Very interesting data that came out. Number of known location, 21%. That's not, and I just realized it doesn't show on the slide here, but 21% is this light blue. And this is the no number only of people. Let me scoop here to see this pops up when I hit next. Oh, there we go. So not known location or number of visitors, employees create a higher level of risk and waste. I think this is a great explanation that the known number of location, or to do not know the number of locations. So this value right here is 45%. So I have 265 companies ranging from 50 employees to over 5,000 employees. 45% do not know the number or location of folks in their facility. That's nearly half. If you look at the buildings you work with today, how many of you can say you actually know this answer as well? So just some of the other information that we've been able to accumulate and pass on. And then the little number down here is 9% only know the location. So knowing what floor, I'm assuming through access control, all the different floors through the elevator banks and so forth, who's accessing what floors. So again, don't want to bore you with too many slides, but this is some great information as we keep going. So what do you consider the top 3 current drivers implementing a automated building system? So really making your building more efficient. I think this is a great feedback that we are able to receive from a lot of our clients. So currently, 38% want enhanced security, 40% was the future. So not much of a change there, but enhancing security and the access control in your building. Again, not a big change either on the optimized operational efficiency and resource allocation. So what is driving technology in the building? Really, what is your ROI? First thing I ask any client that HID works with is, why are you upgrading this? Right? What is that one burning thing that keeps you up at night, or that keeps your leadership up at night? And how can we help improve that? And then another big driver is increased safety. So this has been unchanged for years. I think people, with the news and all the things that are happening, safety is always a big concern. So this all leads into, so what efficiencies do you think can be gained knowing the occupancy level of your buildings? As I mentioned about the RTLS and the real-time versus passive, what's the value in that? This is a great, actually over 2 years. So from 2017, when we ran the poll originally, to 2019, gives you a little bit more information and guidance, but energy efficiency is up 20%. So that occupancy level is definitely being looked at. There's been large acquisitions in the market. Some of our largest OEM and building control system vendors out there. Many of you probably on the call work with a Siemens or a Honeywell, a Johnson Controls, United Technologies, someone in those baskets. So they're all talking about the IoT, Internet of Things, and connecting devices, which is very expensive, but how can we get that occupancy data? How can we improve your energy? So we'll kind of look a little bit more. Increased safety, another big jump from 68% up to 84%. So some just great data points that we like to point out. And then the last result that I will cover with you today, if I can get this going, so being able to communicate with the right people right away, is restricted area monitoring. So this is very interesting. Based on the previous research, that 58% do not know the restricted spaces have been entered. This is one where actually we've had a lot of use cases, a lot of requests coming from our clients in all different vertical markets: healthcare, automotive, corporate business, finance. Do you know when your employees or visitors have entered into restricted areas? Tailgating, I'm sure, is something that has always been a big challenge. Sorry about that. And so how do you solve for tailgating? Right? How do you trust, again, that human factor? These are all questions that you don't know real time. With RTLS systems, we can now track this. We can now locate these people and see what is actually coming. So great little slide there, some more information. As mentioned earlier by Ann, there are some handouts that are in the panel to the right. If you go in, there's 4 different documents there that talk about increased work safety, location service building management, and then a few white papers that we've also come out with that discuss the challenges of access control using cards, barcode readers, so forth. So I definitely recommend you look at those when you get a chance later today or later next week. So challenges in the current landscape, something I'm sure everyone on this call is very familiar with. So let's dig into this. And what I'd like to do is jump into another quick poll. And if you want to take over on this one.
Sure. Great. Thanks, Taylor. So yes, we'll have another poll popping up, and there you see it. And we'd like to ask, what's your greatest challenge with regard to implementing new projects in the realm of what Taylor's been talking about right now? So is it choosing a vendor, just not knowing where to start in terms of getting through the project itself, or getting the budget in place? So please let us know what's the greatest challenge among those, and then we'll show the results in a few moments.
Yeah, so as everyone's answering the questions, this comes up all the time. I think everybody in every department has these questions. So definitely thank you for your feedback.
And there we go. Okay, so Taylor and everyone in the audience, as you can see, getting the budget, 66%. And then 17 and 17% choosing a vendor and not knowing where to start. So thank you, everyone, for sharing your insights there, your experiences. Taylor?
Yeah, no, that's some great feedback. So actually, as we go into the next slide, some of the items I've been fortunate and unfortunate enough to work with several startups as I've gone through my career, and I like to point out the one in the middle. There are 1.35 million tech startups that launch globally each year. There's a lot of noise in the market. There's a lot of people touting themselves as better than the others. The problem is that, will they be around in 5 years? Will these companies get acquired, or will you buy a product and technology that in 2 years won't be supported because they're out of business? 2 of the 3 largest IPOs this year were Uber, Lyft, I think Airbnb. None of them are actually generating a profit. They're all generated at a loss. Multi-billion-dollar companies at a loss. Unforeseen for the first time in history, really, that has happened. So how do you manage that vendor choice? Project selection. What's going to be the biggest value for you? Right? Is it someone in upper management, a CIO or CTO of one of your tenants or in your building that he wants full mobility? He uses Apple for everything, or he's an Android guy all the way. Google Glass came out. Is there a project that has value at that time? Is there an ROI? Can you create an ROI, and is there a real reason for that? And I think that all ties into budget. So 66% of everyone on this call said they don't have budget, right? So how do you get the buy-in for a project? How do you get that first phase, that second phase built in? So these are all challenges that we all overcome. One of the things that HID started doing in several vertical markets is kind of proving the value. Let us show you the technology works, and if you don't, then you get the product back. So a lot of companies are starting to offer these types of benefits to the younger generation to test out products and do it at no cost. So I think we'll start seeing a lot of these things changing as we see technology evolve in the next few years. So best practices, and this is really kind of getting to the end of the presentation. Definitely sped through it, but I want to hopefully give you some time back at your day to day. But so, what are some of the best practices? How are we closing that technology gap? Are we looking at building an energy optimization for floors? Right, is your electric bill too high? Are you listening to your building automation companies? Is it access control? Right. So when you start looking at these best practices, it really depends on that goal. Really, where are you going to spend your money? One, I would say, is most companies, most Fortune 500 companies that work in the manufacturing space, they'll work with you. Ask them. Don't feel afraid to ask for something from them. They want your business. Right now is the time to grow. So we're working with a lot of our clients on trials and pilots and building new technologies at little risk or minimal budget impact to them. So as we go into this last slide is some of the best practice. So are you selecting the right project? I worked in healthcare for several years, and even though IT and facilities stated we wanted one product, the doctors and nurses somehow always found a way to budget for another vendor. The same with when you're managing a large building or you have a complex environment. You have people saying, "Oh, our Wi-Fi is not great," so they go grab a router and just plug it into the wall. So what project is really gaining the most attention, right? One thing that we used to do is look at help desk tickets. Where are the most of the help desk tickets going to? Is it logins, the password? Is it really IT, or is it more of a larger impact somewhere else? Are the conference rooms always booked, but no one's in them? Has anybody ever done a survey or tested that? One project we're doing is visitors and vendors that seem to always go up to the third floor of a certain building where they should not be. Well, how can we track that? How can you run a pilot? Never go all in unless you're 100% accurate in what you're buying. Even to our biggest clients, and even as a vendor myself, I always recommend for clients to test their solution. Always give yourself room if things aren't going the way you want to pull out. I've seen too many times where you spend millions of dollars on a solution and it may not do it for you, right? Or there's maybe issues with it, or they're a startup. So do your due diligence, select the right project, right? Put the right parameters in place and make sure you have the right team from the vendor and with your partners that are managing that project. So choosing the right vendor. Are they going to be in business in 5 years? Technology is coming from everywhere. One that I thought was really interesting the other day was as we got the Apple notification to be able to use the iPhone to pay and open doors, there's now a new technology that's a ring. And you have a ring that you can now use to open car doors and pay for things. So is that technology going to take off? Is it going to be around? Choosing the right vendor and trusting your partner is a key component of this. And then lastly, build the right business case. So, oops, went too far. When I talk about building the right business case, anytime, and I right now just to let you know, I'm in the UK. I'm in London today. Was in Dublin yesterday and was in Stockholm on Monday. Every client that we meet with, as I've traveled around the world with HID, is the first thing I ask is what are they trying to achieve? Always ask yourself, what does success look like? Oh, I just want to save some money. Okay, well, how do you want to save money? Well, I want to provide a more open space. Okay, how do you want to provide a more open space? Really get into the 5 whys of addressing how are you building that business case. One thing that we're doing with our RTLS product, as a great example, was we want to track vendors in a warehouse. We have 1,000 vendors going in and out of 5 buildings, a large biotech company. 1,000 different vendors. Where are they going? What are they doing? We know they have turnstiles. They all have access control. They're all getting in. But what are they doing? What is the business case? Well, they also have forklifts. And we found out they just want to see how many forklifts that they're using every month, because they have 30 forklifts and they're paying a lease on those. So we started asking that question to our partner and to the client. And what we really found out was, well, if we can solve this forklift issue, then we're going to also solve the visitor management issue, because it'll pay for the whole solution, the technology. So where can we find that money? How can we help you save and help you build and expand upon your current business structure? So building that right, business use case is really important. And as mentioned, HID, we're here to help. I appreciate everyone jumping on the call today. As I mentioned, I tried to make it fast. Definitely wanted to point out to the handouts, great information. And I think from there, I'll hand it back over to Ann. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Taylor. And thank you, everyone, for sending in your questions. We do have some time for Q&A, so we'll jump right in. So let's see. Taylor, I guess the first question, I'm going to dive into something specific that you had mentioned. You had talked as far as the real-time location services and other technologies. Can you talk about restricted areas or access to restricted areas? You had mentioned that being a concern with customers, and we saw in the survey that is a concern as well with those who answered in the survey. So can you maybe just talk a little bit about restricted access and some ways to approach that if you are, as a facilities person, seeing issues there? How would you kind of go about evaluating the needs, or maybe what type of technology will work there? What's that process like?
Yeah, so actually this has come up quite a bit. Secure area. So what is secure area? Well, it's going to vary based on the vertical market you work in. But in fashion, a large fashion retailer based in Stockholm, they have 3 floors that have all of their new designs. You're not allowed onto that floor, but somehow security gets alerted twice a day because visitors are on those floors, right? So even though you have the perimeters in place, even though everyone knows about it, visitors still make access to those floors. So a lot of times it's the protect kind of the interior of your building. So what you do is start putting access control systems. Okay, every door now, you have to badge in, badge out to get inside those doors. But people still sneak through the gaps, right? There's always ways to walk through. So one thing that, again, what HID has done, so I'll speak to that, and I've seen it with other products, is there's RTLS systems, so real-time location badges. The difference is with RFID, is that once you badge in with an RFID, it just excites. So I could be standing in a secure area or outside a secure area in a elevator bank, right outside a door of a secure room, and it's going to go off because RFID can't tell me it's that exact person within an exact zone. So that's one big caveat. I know a company, a large company, that spent almost $250,000 with their security team just to track 500 visitors in a building with an RFID system, and ended up not working. So now they're $250,000 in the hole, and what do they do next? So the entry-exit policy is really important, and it doesn't just solve the secure. So now I'm getting into the secure space. I can set up violations and alerts through that. One thing I didn't cover is using Wi-Fi versus Bluetooth. Wi-Fi is a very expensive technology. A typical Wi-Fi tag is about $120 US MSRP. A typical Bluetooth badge is about $30, and it lasts for 3 years. So technology is changing. 5 years ago, Bluetooth wasn't even a thought. I don't know how many of you have used Waze and driven in a tunnel and you lost GPS signal, or used any type of app and lost GPS signal. We're now putting Bluetooth tags in these tunnels for wayfinding. So this technology has gotten a lot cheaper, a lot more affordable. And what we've seen in these secure zones is clients wanting to locate the people that are in that zone, outside of that zone, or you can do, we call it the flyby, making sure that they're not there for more than a minute or 5 minutes, so you're not getting false alerts when you look at those secure zones. So access control takes you so far. As you start using your mobile phone, when you turn on the Bluetooth to open that door, well, guess what? We can now talk to that Bluetooth phone and start providing information about where is that person in the facility. It's not a tracking, it's more just an occupancy. The beauty of GDPR, and it's great for all the users out there, we've worked with a lot of UK companies, as I mentioned, is that with GDPR, we anonymize the data. So all you know is that visitor 1234, they got the tag at the front desk, they're now in a restricted zone, I need to send an alert, right? Why were they up there? Well, can I now correlate that with a video camera? Traditionally, you wouldn't know that happened. You lose time, you lose days. So that's a great example where you can use technology in a cost-effective way to lock down those environments in those areas.
Okay, thank you. So now I'll ask you a broader question that's come in, and it's the question is based on the real-time location services technologies that you've been talking about. What is the best way to start scoping for RTLS, the real-time location services, or other smart technologies to simplify the retrofit process and then to scale deployment? I know you mentioned some piloting and things like that, but can you talk about the best way to start scoping? I know there's a lot of different applications you mentioned here, a lot of different ways this can be used. So if you can just kind of talk about that, that would be great.
Yeah. So when you start looking at scoping these types of projects, we like to keep it small and then grow big. What we've learned is that a facility management group has a security arm, they have an IT arm, they have the executive arm, and no one wants to fund it all themselves, right? You want to bring in a team of people. You want to get an agreement. It's easier to work with a team and bring up these concepts earlier on in discussions. It's sometimes from a sales standpoint, from a vendor standpoint, we don't like that because it slows down the deal. If I may be so frank, it slows down how fast they can sell. But from an end user standpoint, healthcare and other verticals, you want to bring in more people. Well, how do you do that? Typically, we start with departments that are more tech savvy, or we start with visitor management, at least for the RTLS standpoint. The reason why is that visitors are constantly coming in and out of your building. That's an easy demographic where you can see how many cards are being put out every day. One client that I said that we're working with, they have 500 visitors, and all they're going to do for a test case is they want to track who's going onto the second floor of this one building that they're looking at. Well, they spent $250,000 on a solution previously to try to track the whole building, and it didn't work. So for literally $40,000 of hardware, software, running wire, all the installation with Bluetooth, they're looking just to track 500 visitors onto one floor. So think small. I always say, don't try to boil the ocean, right? We're just going to try to boil a little pot. You just want to make some tea. You don't need to boil 5 gallons of water to make 1 cup of tea. So when you start scoping this, identify the entry points, exit points. If that's for mustering, if that's for security, then you want to look at occupancy. So do you really want to know who's on the floor? Some people start getting into distances, and then it becomes a who's better at accuracy. Well, I just need to know someone's on a floor in a given area. So we can start backing into this. The challenge you'll hear is there's a lot of noise out there. Wi-Fi has been the market leader for RTLS for well over a decade, but it's very expensive. A Wi-Fi access point, Aruba, Cisco, you're paying $500 for an access point that covers 2,500 square feet. You're not getting a lot of accuracy out of that. You can see room level to a point, but now you're also paying for the licenses and the cost. So when you work with your vendor and you start having these conversations, be very upfront. What else is it going to cost me? What about the labor, software, hardware? If they're telling you, oh, it's going to cost us X, Y, Z, well, what does that entail? I always say, what's in the fine print? So as you start planning, look at the first request and then go talk to the other departments. I'm sure IT's probably had the same question. They may have looked at it for a little while. Management, what other systems can you tie to it? This is the new time of APIs. The HID product line, as I mentioned, we're a large OEM. You will actually use our product and not even know you're using our product because we let our partners build different applications. That's how we grow. Is we want to build a very streamlined, basically supported, backed product that works, but we don't want to dictate to you how to use the product. You're the client, you're the owner. So what is that challenge that you're trying to solve for, and then how can we work into it? And start small and then grow big. Then you can start looking at SaaS models, perpetual license models, How is that software going to cost you year over year over year? And then build out from there. And I think most companies these days are putting those different pieces in place to help you plan for that and strategize for that. That's what a vendor's for. You're the client, so don't ever forget that, right? They're wanting to take you to the dance. So have those conversations. Find out how they can help you.
Thank you. Thanks, Taylor. And I think we have time for about maybe one more question. And the question is, looking at this type of technology, the location services specifically, we're talking to facilities professionals here on the phone call and maybe some other stakeholders. And then there's, of course, the end users and the occupants that they're looking to serve with some of these technologies or to, So the question is, can you talk a little bit about maybe things to consider from that facility manager's decision-making standpoint, from their perspective, how these technologies will impact them from their perspective? Of course, a lot of things you've been talking about, but then on the other hand, anything that comes into play that might, that kind of might come into play when considering obviously end user. Is there anything that maybe, kind of butts heads or streamlines nicely, or kind of anything that you need to take into perspective, where you need to take into account both perspectives there? Do you run into those kind of things where, there's two perspectives to take into account, and what's the best way to approach that?
Yeah. One very large oil and gas company that I like to bring up, they were very hesitant to look at moving to a solution like this because they couldn't calculate the ROI. The management company wanted to adopt the technology, but the client really just couldn't justify the cost. It was going to cost them for 5,000 people, very large campus. They couldn't figure out how to build an ROI into the value. And then a fire happened, and literally as we were piloting for 50 users on a given floor, we could actually see real time that two people didn't even leave the building during a fire alarm. And the question is, why didn't they leave the building? And we went and talked to them, and they said, well, we knew it was just a fake alarm. We didn't have time. If that was a real fire, can you put a price on a life? Right? What is the value to you? Someone says, oh, this is too expensive. I said, compared to what? Oh, we just don't need it. Well, compared to what? And so those are one of the questions you start getting into is, okay, how do you drive that value? Is it energy optimization? That's a big one. I mentioned Siemens and Honeywell and a few others. They, want the lights to be turned off and turned on. Just something simple like that. That's easy data you can actually pull. What you do is you just correlate how are people using that floor after hours compared to your energy usage from these building automation systems. So I can see that someone was working till 5 p.m. and then at 6 p.m. We did it for our office in Minnesota. I actually looked up the other day, there were 0 people in our office, but the AC was set at 70 degrees and we're cooling a building that no one's in. We know that because the occupancy sensors, the data that we have, the RTLS system, no one was even in the building. So it's soft dollars that become hard dollars really fast. Those are some of the stats that you have to look at. And it takes a little bit of work, but that's why you have to build not just one use case, asset tags, location tags, duress tags, environmental monitoring assets. Is your machines, how often are your servers in the closet being monitored? I found out actually an overwhelming amount of people had no idea what their servers were running at in the temperature. They had their security guards checking the rooms every 2 hours. Well, that's a lot of labor that you're paying for someone just to go check closets for heat. So just some of the examples we've seen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that. And it does look like we're out of time. So I want to thank you, Taylor, for the presentation today. A lot of good information, a lot of good research, and thank you for your time.
Great, thanks, Ann.
And of course, I want to thank the audience for attending today and for sending in your questions, and to HID Global for sponsoring the webinar. I do want to point out again that a recording of the webinar will be available to you online at facilityexecutive.com. And also please feel free to download those handouts. They'll also be made available to you. Lastly, I want to mention that HID is a sponsor at the upcoming Facility Executive Live event in Arlington, Virginia on September 19th. So if you want to hear more from their team and you're in the Arlington, Virginia area, September 19th, there will be a conference and networking event hosted by Facility Executive Magazine, and you can learn more about that at facilityexecutivelive.com. Thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon.